To start off at quarterback, it looks like they're going to start out with Sam Howell, and he was their 5th round pick 2 years ago, which seems pretty bad to start off with, but he was initially thought of as being a 1st round talent the year before he declared, which was also the year that his team had some supporting cast for him. As the next year, his junior year, there was basically no talent on the North Carolina team, and that really was something that held him back, though his basic counting stats like yards and touchdowns were still pretty good, even without having any receiving talent or a solid offensive line to protect him. With Jacoby Brissett, though, he played very valiantly last season, as if you look at his passing yards and touchdown to interception ratio, it doesn't look good, but the advanced numbers such as EPA, which if you don't know what EPA means, I have a video explaining it, and also his PFF grade as well was really solid. So I'm more inclined to side with the advanced stats because I think they typically do a better job of painting a picture on how well a player is done. And with Brissett, he did well on all of the advanced metrics, so that is definitely something. With that said, though, the passing yards and touchdown interception ratio is a thing, and his stats don't look good from that perspective. So that is something that is kind of worrisome for him if he does have to start. And with expected points added, one benefit that Brissett had was that the Browns had an elite offensive line and Amari Cooper, who's a dependable number 1 receiver. So that inflates his stats, in addition to Kevin Stefanski being thought of as a pretty good offensive mind as well. But he does have the benefit of going to Washington, where, as a little preview to the rest of the team, there is going to still be a ton of receiving talent and a pretty steep drop-off on the offensive line side, but at least the receiving talent is something. Speaking of the offensive line, though, that's what we're looking at now. It is really rough, as last year they ranked 25th in pass blocking and 23rd in run blocking, and all they have to show from last year to this year is Andrew Wiley, who was far and away the worst lineman for the Chiefs, and is overall a below-average tackle in this league. So it's not really like help is on the way. Charles Leno Jr. is solid, and Sam Cosmi is also pretty good, but that's it. The rest of the line is not good, and there's not really a lot to be excited about in the hopes of a young player stepping up or anything like that. A place they should feel good, though, is with their weapons, because Terry McLaurin is at a minimum a top 20 receiver. Jahan Dotson is a good number 2 and has some upside still, and Curtis Samuel is a solid number 3. There's a little bit of a drop-off at tight end because Logan Thomas is not particularly good, but then at running back 2, they have Brian Robinson, who's really solid, and Antonio Gibson, who is probably a little bit disappointing at this point in his career, but is still more than capable, especially if he's going to be their number 2 running back, which might be the case. So they have options, and they really just have good talent all the way through, and the skill sets make sense. McLaurin's an outside guy, Dotson can play in the slot, Samuel is also going to play in the slot a fair bit, but it's not like they need to be in the slot to succeed. They just can also play in the slot, which is really a nice balance to have. Moving to their defense, there's a lot to like there as well, as their defensive line just has premier talent everywhere, as Jonathan Allen is one of the best pressure getters on the interior, and he's paired nicely with Deron Payne, who can also get after the quarterback. But there's also amazing edge play as well, with Chase Young being a premier player when he's healthy, and Montez Sweat being an elite edge also. That's a lot of talent right there. And they're not too thin at the interior either, because Abdullah Anderson has really played well in his time getting snaps. So that's a lot of talent and a solid amount of guys that can contribute. Shifting to their defensive backs, Kendall Fuller is a complete stud and does not get talked about nearly enough in the conversation of elite corners. Emmanuel Forbes was a true first round talent that he drafted probably a little bit early, but is still a nice player to have. Jartavius Martin, I don't know very much about. I know that he was expected to be a third round pick and was expected to be a safety, at least according to the consensus draft board. But beyond that, I'm not too sure about him. Darek Forrest is a solid safety, and Cameron Curl is one of the premier safeties as well. So they do have a lot of talent. It's just going to be a question of if they can put it all together or not, as there is going to be a ton of turnover from last year to this upcoming season, which usually is not the best for defensive backs, as there's usually a need to have some sort of cohesion, but the talent is far upgraded. At linebacker, they have an interesting duo, as Jamin Davis has unlimited potential, as he is just a freak of nature athletically, and he's shown in spurts that he can be a pretty good cover guy. He just has not shown that very consistently. And the other linebacker is Cody Barton, who is one of the least inspiring linebackers in the NFL, as he is just okay at everything. He's been suited as a backup for almost all of his career. This last year was the first year that he actually really got some playing time, and he's probably better as a backup, but he's not the worst linebacker in the NFL. He's just not very good at anything. Lastly, for their coaching, despite being touted as Riverboat Ron Rivera is actually one of the most conservative coaches in the NFL, and I'm not too high on him in general. I don't think he's gotten the most out of his defenses in recent memory, at least. I think he's mainly gotten about what you could expect out of them, which, if you're in the modern era not going to be giving any sort of offensive influence as a head coach, you better be exceptional as a defensive mind. And I just don't see it with Rivera. I think he's a solid defensive mind, but again, there's a ton of talent on this Commanders defense, and there has been a good amount of talent throughout the years as well, and they've just been good. They've never really been an elite group, so I just don't see any sort of elevation with Rivera. I think he's in that bottom half of the coaches in the NFL, and if Bieniemy does well as the offensive coordinator, I think switching to him as the head coach down the line would make a ton of sense. In all, there's a ton of talent on this Commanders team. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on them because they just think that they're universally bereft of talent. But there's a lot to like on this team. And it's really just going to be a question of if Sam Howell can become the guy for them. And the odds are definitely stacked against them. Fifth round quarterbacks are very, very often not the guy, but Howell does have it working in his favor that at one point at least he was thought of as a first rounder, and he does have a fair amount of athletic potential, so his ceiling is higher than most fifth round quarterbacks have, but I think he's probably not going to be their guy, and I think that's going to hold them back quite a bit. Brissett, he did very well in the advanced stats. The simple ones, not so much. So I'm pretty conflicted on him. I wouldn't feel confident with him being my quarterback down the line. And it's really a case where if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback. It's certainly less than ideal too, because again, with their talent being pretty good, it's going to be hard for them to get a high enough draft pick to get a quarterback if Howell is not the right guy. And that just sucks because they might just be in purgatory for an extended period of time then. But whatever the case is, the next quarterback for the Commanders is going to have a good foundation in place for him because Bieniemy is a solid offensive play caller, and they also have a ton of talent in the receiving ranks. The offensive line, not so much, but the defense should also make it that they're not going to have to put up 40 a night to have a chance of winning. Those are my thoughts on the Commanders. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section. And also be sure to like and subscribe for more NFL and NBA content.